Do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? You know, I have lost track of how many times I've been asked that question. And it makes sense, I guess, to ask it, especially in the world in which we live. Many people think that the way to overcome many of the divisions and wars going on in our world right now is if we could all affirm that every human being, doesn't matter what faith they follow, everybody, Muslims and Christians and Hindus and everybody else, are all worshipping the same God. That way would lie peace and harmony and utopia. Is it true? Well, no, not really. You see, the problem is it's all very well to say that Muslims and Christians both believe in and worship God. The problem becomes when you push into what do we mean by God. See, God is not just an abstract concept. According to the Bible, God has some very definite characteristics. And what fascinates me, when you look into some of the big biblical ideas at the heart of the Christian faith about who God is, we see huge differences when it comes to Islam. Let me give you just 3 or 4 examples. The God of the Bible is a God who's relational. On the very first page of the Old Testament, God walks and talks with Adam and Eve. He walks and talks with Moses. In fact, the Old Testament says that God would walk and talk with Moses as a man would speak with his friend. And then, of course, most supremely, in the person of Jesus Christ, says the Bible, God steps into space and time, into history, takes on flesh, and relates personally. The whole point of Christian faith is to be in a relationship with him. When we look at the Qur'an, the God of the Qur'an is distant and remote. He doesn't step into space and time in the person of Jesus. He doesn't walk and talk with Adam and Eve. And nowhere does the Qur'an promise, like the Bible does, that in heaven we will once again walk and talk with God. The God of the Qur'an is distant. Secondly, though, the God of the Bible is the God who can be known. Time and time again, God reveals in the Bible not just his commands and his instructions, he also reveals his character, his identity. To Moses in the Old Testament, he reveals his personal name, Yahweh. And of course, again, in Jesus, he reveals his very own character to his disciples and his followers and to us. And the call of the Bible is not just to know about God, but to know him. The God of the Bible is not a concept to be believed in, but a person to be known and related to. Again, in the Qur'an, he's utterly different. The God we find there reveals his commands and his instructions, but doesn't reveal his character, doesn't reveal his personal name, doesn't reveal his identity. He's a God who is distant and hidden. Nowhere in the 114 chapters of the Qur'an are Muslims ever invited to know God or enter into relationship with him. But the third difference is perhaps the most powerful of all, and that concerns love. The God of the Bible is a God who is love. Now, often people think that all religions teach that God is love, but that's simply not true. The Qur'an never says that God is love and doesn't use that language. But the Bible does on page after page say that God is not merely loving, but God is love. But it gets even more interesting than that. What's the greatest form of love you could possibly imagine? What would it look like? The highest form of love is self-sacrifice. Perhaps the greatest example might be a parent who sees their child about to be knocked down by a runaway car, and that parent leaps into the road, throws their child to safety, and dies in the process. That would be self-sacrificial love, loving another person so much that you lay down your life. Well, if God is the greatest being there is, and if God is a God of love, then presumably when God loves, it must be the greatest possible form of love. That takes us to the question, could God offer self-sacrificial love? Well, Islam denies that. That's not what God would do. The heart of the Bible, on the other hand, is a God who in the person of Jesus Christ stepped into space and time and went to the cross and did that to deal with the brokenness and alienation, what the Bible calls sin, that keeps us from him. He's a relational God, but he's the God who has offered self-sacrificial love that we might have relationship with him. The greatest form of love from the greatest possible being. That's the God of the Bible. It's not the God that you'll find in the Qur'an or any other religion.